welcome to Zion's Banner. I'm getting better at anticipating the delay that will occur inevitably, no matter how hard we try. But the bit rate is high tonight, and we are here. And so I'm excited. If there are any folks watching via Periscope or Facebook, chime in, please. Let us know that you're out there because I can't always tell who's out there and who's at which channel. I set this up as an event on Facebook, and I hope it works as an event on Facebook, but I'm not sure it will. Thanks for the great intro. Air Church chimed in here, and people are definitely on time this evening. We've got a lot of ground to cover because we're really going to jump from the end of one pericope to the other. I was having a great conversation with my pastor. I believe that good teachers are under authority. I was running my view of using biblical theology, and we had a great and excellent talk for those who follow the station, and I see that. I see you can be personable. Just a little news. My orals for my dissertation are set up. I did spend a lot of the day kind of getting things in order and figuring out the strategy for entering into that. I am excited because the real potential exists to finish this, and we're looking forward to getting this doctorate done. And so from orals, things are going to get real busy. So there may be some bumps in the schedule as I go to California next week. I will keep in charge. Now, how do you know what's going on? Well, one way you know is Patreon, but that's okay because some folks are very supportive, but they're not necessarily go through the Patreon route. At Facebook, you can look up Zion's Banner on Facebook. You know how to do that. You just go www.facebook.com/Zion's Banner. You will find me. And I will be putting notices up because the 2 weeks from the point of orals, I have about a couple weeks to get the final form of that dissertation in, and then I am done. By the way, interestingly enough, Biola is not having actual graduation ceremonies for the next 2 rounds. So no one will see a real full graduation ceremony until the winter of 2021. But that's okay because God has been taking us through this process, and it looks like He's going to bring us across that finish line. And I am excited. I will try to do something. I think we're going to do something back here. Hopefully, get the hood, get the stuff up there, and maybe grab a picture and put it on if we complete this process as I envision God taking us through it. And who knows, maybe we could do like a little watch party and I can come on and wear the regalia and you guys can all see me and we can have a good time together. I don't know, that would be kind of fun. I'm doing the graduation virtually. Why not go ahead and have the party virtually, So that might be a real cool thing to do. Whoops, Jerusalem slipped for a split second, but a lot of things are slipping. Okay, excellent. Air Church confirmed that Facebook works. That's fine. I wanted to make that available to the Zion's Banner folks, and that's another way of keeping in touch with people. Also, there is Discord. If I have your Discord number, I can put that in, and that's another way of me keeping in touch with you. So I want to keep you informed. California Wednesday will probably be a premiere, a podcast I did. It will be shorter with Next Generation Saints. And then Thursday, we're going to have a little trouble figuring it all out, but we're going to work it out. Now, the material I'm doing, I hope to be able to garner some. I don't own the podcast and I don't own the radio station. But I want to make that available to folks as kind of special stuff too. So here we go. We're discussing some stuff that's going to be a little touchy. But this is what I like about exegetical teaching. This is what I like about this sort of section on section teaching, is that you're forced to deal with the stuff that you don't want to. The problem with topical preaching is that you can really duck the stuff you don't want to talk about. And you don't have to talk about it. One of my first Bible teachers was named Glendale Tony. By the way, he has a podcast. I can repost that again. I don't have that on me. He's one of the finest exegetical teachers that I know. Great guy, still keeps in touch. Has written a book about the church, and he really, really drove home the value of exegetical teaching. And that was something he pointed out, is that he can't duck the hard topics. So speaking of the hard topics, there's our segue. Let's dig into the hard topics for tonight. I'm not quite sure why my PowerPoint is doing that. There we go. My PowerPoint didn't point too well for a second or two, but that should be coming up momentarily. I'm just checking to make sure that it's not a problem with our high speed. There we go. No, it's just the normal delay in the universe. Sorry about that. My little road took a second or two more. I like this background. It's kind of the rough-hewn road. Looks like some area maybe near Ireland. I'm not sure. Forgiveness and divorce. Which rabbinical school did Jesus belong to? Isn't that an interesting topic? We're going to have it a little backloaded, where we're going to cover some background to Matthew 19. Most people aren't aware of why Jesus is being asked the question about divorce, and what that means for the rabbinical school at the time. And so we're going to be able to go ahead and get into that and give a little bit of background there. And so I am excited about that. So if you want to hear a little bit of the background about the teaching on divorce and why it's there, you're going to get to do that this evening. So I'm going to get to my PowerPoint here and pull that up. I'm making sure that it's the best it can be. Yeah, that looks to be there for you guys to see that Irish scene. I've never been to Ireland. My wife always wants to go. She's got Celtic background. And I know people are thinking, is she an Irish Jew? There actually were Irish Jews. There's even an Irish folk song about Irish Jews, but no. I married myself a Ruth. So that's where things are at. She wanted to know about Jewish people, and God decided to teach her about Jewish people the hard way. Now, the lessons haven't always been fun, but they have been interesting. And so she's learning about Jewish people by marrying one. That's kind of a hard road to go. But we have celebrated 30 some odd years of marriage. And so let's talk about forgiveness. Look into the background of Matthew 19 at the beginning. See what Jesus says, why he says it, and how it all works. Beginning with that, I'm going to click this. Of course, there will always be a delay, but we're going to start with Peter's inquiry. Now, we're at the end of 18, and again, we're going to be skirting one of these pericopes, because I could not go without connecting the end of 18 to 19. There always is a connection. Remember, we're dealing with story, with illustration, with teaching. There's always a connection. Even though the chapter divisions are not inspired, the flow of the scriptures are. And so I always look for, why did this come next? What is Matthew telling us? What is the writer telling us? How would the audience reading this in the order or its flow, what connections would they make? And so we're going to be dealing with the end of forgiveness here. Peter is going to go ahead and ask a question. Peter is going to inquire based on this whole discussion here. Peter's going to now ask, how much does he have to forgive? I mean, really, what's the limit to this whole thing? And so in 18:21, where we're starting, Peter comes to him and says, Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me, and I shall forgive him? Up to 7 times. Now, Peter is not asking to find out the most number of times he has to forgive. He's really trying to figure out where the line is. It's kind of like with kids. Do I have to? How much do I have to? You want to figure out where the lines are so that you know what you can get away with. And so Peter is saying, well, what is the limit of forgiveness really here? The fact that he's talking about his brother probably is not an indication that he is discussing his earthly family. Remember that Peter has dropped his fisherman's net. He has decided to follow Jesus. And so it probably refers to the Messianic community. Now, it could refer to his family, but I don't think that that's the answer there. And so, really, Peter's asking, in this community that I'm now part of, how often do I really have to forgive? Can I figure out what the limit is? When people have to ask questions like that, they're looking for where the loophole is. What's the most I have to do? And Peter asks how often. He doesn't say how often can I forgive my brother, but he asks how often shall he forgive his brother. And so that's kind of a wrong question, really. One commentator pointed out that if you have to ask, you already don't understand forgiveness. We're going to end up digging further into how Jesus deals with this question. Okay? There is some generosity here. Peter isn't picking the lowest number he can get away with. We want to be fair about this thing. Peter's far from perfect, but there is some generosity in here. And I want to give you some background here that not gets talked about when this gets preached on. Often we get the message of, it looks like someone has their hand raised. That is a cool icon. If there is a question, just type that, throw that right in the chat, but that is a neat icon. I'm trying to figure out, what would be between the two colons there. That's really neat. If you do have a question, just type it in the chat. We'll go back through it. If it's a really interesting question, I'm looking forward to the day I can just pull that question right into Restream Studio or something and just, share it. But I can jump to the screen, share it with folks, and we can talk about it. So, yeah, definitely. Let's make this conversational. So, I do want to let you know there's some background to this, though. And that's why I've stuck that up there. Okay, it's an emoji of a guy waving hello. Oh, sorry, it's not a question. That's great. I love the hello. And it's still a cool emoji. I couldn't get the waving part. Anyway, definitely hi back at you. And I think I typed that in there. I am going to remove my face again. Now, I know that's dangerous. It's not so much I like to see myself. It's I like to know you're seeing me. It kind of scares me that I'm going to wake up and not really be there. But I'm going to increase the size of this a little bit because rabbis don't write big. No, I'm just being facetious here. But I want to get this a little bigger for you. A.T. Robinson spent some time going ahead and making this really clear. And so I want to give that background too because I think it's highly valuable and worthwhile for you to go ahead and see this. Now, Peter was being generous because the Jewish rule was roughly 3 times. So 7 is higher than 3. Let's take a look at some rabbinical sources here. Rabbinical sources indicate that one was required to seek forgiveness only 3 times. Now that's seeking forgiveness. The reference given there is Yoma 86b through 87a. Now, we have to be a little careful. Sometimes, and I've seen this particularly with William Lane Craig lately, he wants to make everything Jesus said and did so spectacularly different that it has no continuity with the rest of the Bible. And I want to be careful here. Jesus is speaking to a Jewish audience, and he's speaking into Second Temple Judaism. And so I want to be a little careful. I think what we need to do is see the uniqueness of Jesus' person, who he was, the uniqueness of what Jesus did, and the way he does up the standard without necessarily creating a total discontinuity between that and the whole rest of the Bible. Because I think that shoots biblical theology in the foot. So let's see if we can balance this out here. Uh, Amy Levin, there's a wonderful resource. You can see it listed there. It's available. I got it. It was actually recommended to me at a staff meeting. It was probably one of the most valuable CPM staff meetings I've ever been in. And they make this comment: teaching was not in opposition to what may have existed, while the sources are Mishnah. Now we have to be careful here with sources. Okay, later Talmudic sources were not around, likely during the time of Jesus's period. In other words, I don't look at something Maimonides wrote and take it at face value that Jesus is responding to that type of idea, because it's a later idea. And what you want to do is avoid anachronism where you read later stuff in. This is Mishnah. So we're dealing with early Talmudic sources, but the thing about Mishnah is that some of the writings compiled in the Mishnah actually go back to the period of time when Jesus was around, and even before that time when we start talking Hallel and Shammai. So I'm going to say that it is likely, because we're dealing with Mishnah, that some of these ideas were around. If I was dealing with Gomorrah, I was dealing with later rabbinical writings during the Middle Ages, I would be less likely to say that. Now, I have it on good authority in the person of Dr. Darrell Bach that Mishnah can be looked at, and there's probably some validity to it. Elizabeth, you're asking a really good question. I'm going to get to that question. And so I'm going to get to that question. Okay. This is a real question. It needs to be dealt with in the context of the scriptures. I'm not ignoring you, but I want to give you a real answer. And I want to give a real answer to those out there, because that's such a poignant question. Elizabeth was asking about dating after divorce. And so I do want to handle that. But let me lead up to it. You know, I could jump to a proof text and I could give some sort of opinion, but I want to give you a balanced answer, and I want to give you a sensitive and loving answer too. Okay? Right now, let's deal with forgiveness before we deal with forgiveness as it relates to marriage. Okay? But hang in there with me, Elizabeth. I hope, you know, being from the land down under and knowing it's a little later, that you can hang out for a little while, and let's go through the text. Okay? There is material in Shabbat 15, Rosh Hashanah 17b, Megillot 28a, that we are supposed to act mercifully towards our fellows or their fellows, because we will be treated mercifully by heaven. So the idea that you show mercy because you want God, or you are desirous of God to be merciful to you, or God will be merciful to the merciful, is not something that's unheard of during that time period. And I just want to bring that out. And rest assured, when we get to that part, I'm extremely sensitive to some of the issues we'll be touching. Here's what's significant. Jesus does up the standards beyond the expectation of the disciples. That we can definitely say. Because Jesus says, I do not say to you up to 7 times, but up to 70 times 7. Now, this is where people wax eloquent, and they get all eloquent about whether this is an idiom and it means an infinite number, or whether it doesn't mean an infinite number. And there's much discussion about this. Okay? What I found interesting is there's an allusion in Scripture that people wouldn't expect. This is brought out again by Amy J. Levin. I'm sorry about the J there, but that's the way the citation software puts it. A.J. Levin and M.Z. And you have the rest of the citation there. Here's the weird thing. The 70 times 7 is the same phrasing used in Genesis 4:24 in the Septuagint, which is about Cain and Abel. Now, I found that really interesting, that the Septuagint, the translation of the Hebrew Scriptures into Greek, uses the same phrasing in Genesis 4:24. Okay, and what these folks are pointing out is that within biblical narrative, there may be a little bit of a hint or a calling back to the ancient blood feud between Cain and Abel. Not Cain's fault, but Abel had some real brother issues, some real family issues here. And there may be a contrast between that blood feud and the intimacy of Jesus's community. And I love biblical theology, so I found this really interesting. The same ambiguity exists in other places. The text of the 12 patriarchs. Now, that's an intertestamental writing, so it's not inspired, but it does tell us something about the language and culture at the time. We don't want to just, ignore where we can learn something about backgrounds. Uses the same sense of 70 times 7. So the upshot is this: it may or may not be an idiom, but it's certainly beyond the expectation of the disciples. So Jesus has upped the standard. Now he's going to tell a parable. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like a certain king who wanted to settle accounts. Letting you know that this is indeed a parable. People sometimes don't know if something's a parable or not. I mean, there's nothing in the Greek that says, behold, this is a parable. How do we know? Because a parable is comparing something with something. And the Greek word here, which you should be able to see, I'm going to put my face back in there shortly, so you have something to look at other than just the slides. But it's really connected to the word we get homogenized from. It's an aorist passive, and it means to consider something like something, to compare something. And that's what a parable is. It means the idea of putting two things alongside each other to teach a point. So he's doing a parable here. Now, with a parable, what you got to do is match the parts up with their corresponding parts. Now, the certain king is God. Someone could say, well, is a certain king the Son? At this point, that's not real clear to people. The way it is. There's no strict Trinitarian formula that's clearly being given here. Let's just say God in general, okay? His servants, he's most likely discussing relationships between the kingdom community. A lot of people take this in terms of a believer and unbeliever. I think this is specifically directed at Peter's question, how often do I have to forgive my fellow believer who's a real pain in the neck and keeps doing the same thing? The servant who, with the exceedingly large debt, who didn't forgive, is a servant who had no forgiveness in his heart, and it's clear that he's mentioned that this becomes apparent. Okay, when we start the parable, you don't know how unforgiving he is, but certainly that will become clear. Okay. Now, why would the servant not forgive? We're going to see from the parable, and I think I'm going to take the time to read it to you, just because I'm talking about motivations here. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like a certain king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. When he began to settle accounts, one was brought to him who owed him 10,000 talents. He was not able to pay his master. His master commanded that he be sold, his wife and children, and all that he had, so the payment could be made. So we're talking about a forced indentured servitude, which was not real pleasant at the time. The servant fell down, saying, Master, have patience with me, and I will pay it all. Now we're going to see, that the master of the servant was moved with compassion and forgave him the debt. Now, the idea of forgive doesn't mean that he temporarily didn't want the servant to pay. We're talking about total forgiveness here. To forgive a debt was to just consider it, just wipe the slate clean. Okay, that's pretty incredible. The servant here is offering to wipe the slate completely clean. The servant went out and found one of his fellow servants. Okay, so the servant who was forgiven this debt. By the way, this was an unpayable amount of money. It was more than he could ever pay back. Okay? And you need to just kind of understand that. He found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii. Now, look at the relative difference between the debts here. There's a greater debt and a lesser debt. There's 10,000 talents and 100 denarii. So the servant he goes to owes far less than he does, and laid hands on him and took him by the throat. So he's choking him, okay? I mean, this is like nasty choking stuff here. This is bad news, okay? And took him by the throat, saying, "Pay me what you owe." And his fellow servant fell down, "Have patience with me." That's the same plea he makes. You obviously understand that. "And I will pay it all." But he would not, and he went and threw him in prison. That was like debtor's prison. Debtor's prison has never made sense to me. How do you pay a debt off when you can't work to pay the debt off? It's never seemed like a really great system. But the idea was that financial debt, and we're going to talk about this, is like moral debt. And so that's why the association between economic malfeasance and criminal action. And by the way, it's true. Extreme malfeasance with malice is criminal action, because you're really stealing. If you owe somebody something and you are refusing to pay them back or to do anything to alleviate the situation at all, then you're really taking their money in an illegitimate and wrong fashion, because really that money is owed them. It is rightfully theirs. And so basically has it. So the fellow servants saw what he had done. The other servants are watching this. They're not real pleased what he had done, and they go and they tell the master. Then the master, after he had called him, said, "You wicked servant, I forgave you all the debt that you begged me to," which is a far higher debt. "You should have had compassion on your fellow servant, just as I had compassion on you." The master was angry, delivered him to the torturers until he should pay all that he was due to him. Your heavenly Father will do to each one of you who does not from his heart does not forgive his brother his trespasses. Now, I don't want to get too far into this because this would spoil the PowerPoint here. And then we will touch on divorce. So hang in. And why I think you'd go from this forgiveness thing to start discussing divorce. Why does Jesus even take this topic up? The judgment of the king is clear. You didn't forgive. My forgiveness of you is rescinded. Okay? The point of the parable is very clear. Jesus is giving the Father's attitude towards those who will not forgive. And the idea is the forgiveness of any believer is a far lesser debt than you owe God. In other words, God has forgiven you so much more than your forgiveness of any believer would ever indicate that indeed you should forgive. Much like the Talmudic, the Mishnah quotes and stuff we're looking at. Heaven will forgive you if you're forgiving. Which now will make people in the audience say, but wait a minute, doesn't that mean, given the parable, that the king is God and the servant is part of the messianic community here, that eternal salvation can be lost? I mean, does this teach that if you don't forgive your father, God won't forgive you, and you can lose your salvation? Well, let me deal with that, because I really am concerned about the security of salvation. I am not a hard Calvinist. You will learn more about that, but really that is an issue that really is important to me. I have worked with other street ministers who don't really hold to that, and I find that troublesome, because I'm really offering something to someone, and I better be very clear what I'm offering. So I'm going to put my face back in here now, because we're back to the slides, or at least I'm going to try to. You never know. There we go. Just how well this is going to end up working when I shrink things down and put them in. But there we go. And then I'm going to go ahead and put the video capture back in, and I am back. Look at that. And before the end of the story. So, here's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with what's called a third-class condition. And that's why I introduced class conditions. Because as I said, they're very important. And you might have been thinking, why are they very important? That this is a case in which a class condition tells us a whole lot. A third-class condition, as we talked about, meant a most probable future action. Now, if God had wanted to say that one could lose their security or that they could lose their salvation, he would not have used a third-class condition. It would have been more logical. It would have been what would be expected according to the language and the way it works for him to use a first-class condition. And the idea here is forgiveness is not the basis of our salvation, it's the evidence of our salvation. A forgiven person will forgive. In fact, one of the motivations for the servant not forgiving, why is he collecting the money from the servant? He's already had the debt forgiven. He doesn't need the money to pay it back. It's because he didn't really believe his master had forgiven him. See, he didn't really trust his master's forgiveness. And so although I moved quickly past that slide, I think that that's a real key to understanding this. Okay? And so I think that that's key to comprehending what's going on here. I think the servant didn't really trust the forgiveness, and so he gets the other servant, and what he's illustrating is he didn't believe he was forgiven, so he did not forgive. Okay. I know that there's precious conversation and ministry going on, and so I'm grateful for the conversation that's going around. We're going to switch, and we're going to go from just forgiveness to divorce. Okay, this is a hot topic. Why does Jesus do this? Because he's moved locations, but the issue of divorce was a hot topic during the time period. And it's also related to the discussion of forgiveness. It's not totally separate. Jesus now moves, and this is the beginning of Jesus's Judean ministry, and then we have the Passion Week and the end, basically, his Jerusalem ministry, the last part of things. So we have the Galilean ministry, we have the Judean ministry, we have the Jerusalem ministry with the Passion. That's a way some people break this down. We do know that he's moving to Judea, and most commentators say this is the beginning of his Judean ministry. He has skipped Samaria. Now, John tells us he did visit Samaria, but in going here, he avoids, and they had to go out of their way to avoid Samaria. Okay? So he's in the region of Judea. This is an incredible topic. So bear with me. We have hurting people out there, and let's see why this topic even gets raised. Because I got to admit, pastors don't want to discuss this most of the time, and I understand why. Why would Jesus even discuss this? The multitudes followed him, and he healed them. Now the Pharisees came. You know, they are the guys that stir up trouble. And they came to test him, saying, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any reason? So what is this about? And where are these guys coming from? And why is this even discussing? What they are doing is trying to trap Jesus, and they want to pigeonhole him based on which rabbinical school he tended towards. All right? And this is very important to understand. They want to know where he's coming from. And by the way, that gives an excuse. You're of Hillel. Well, we don't really accept Hillel. So we don't have to accept your teaching. Okay? Who do you align with? Which household are you part of? Which rabbinical training are you part of? This is the whole background of this question. Jewish teachers did permit divorce on the basis of what's called the exception clause, Deuteronomy 24, 1 through 4. And by the way, this exception clause has different views among it. Do understand, in Jesus' day, there were two rabbinical schools. Shammai was the less liberal of the two schools. He was more of the literal interpretationist of the Torah. And Hillel was far more liberal. Now, Jesus' argument is based on a rabbinical standard of argument. Okay? And Binyan Av Mishneh Ketuvim. He makes an argument by stringing two verses together in order to make a point. Okay? In this case, he's utilizing Genesis 1:27 and Genesis 2:24. Jesus' strong stand on marriage, and it is a terribly strong stand, would seem to align closer to Shammai than Hillel. And this is the standard he places on his community. His argument is creation. And notice that both verses are right at the beginning of Genesis. And so that's where we're at. He appeals to creation. What we learn is that Jesus's will, or understanding of the will of the Father, was restoration of creation. In other words, the idea is to restore creation. That's what God really wants to do. And he's restoring that which is fallen and that which is broken. Okay? Now, I'm going to go out on a limb here. We have to understand that the word porneia there, fornication, is not the word for adultery. In the Hebrew, actually, and this is what you have to go back to, when you see something, and this is what Christian teachers don't do. They don't go back to the Deuteronomy passage. If Jesus is dealing with a passage that creates a certain position because of what the rabbis understood, then the proper thing to do is to figure out what they understood. What did the people understand? What is Jesus responding to? The actual word means an unclean thing or an unclean word. Well, that doesn't help us much. Yeah, but it actually does, because the same phrase or idea is contained in Nehemiah and Ezra. So let's see what they understood. This is the way you do biblical theology. What was the understanding when Moses gave the permission for a certificate of divorce? How was that understanding understood in the Bible? Tells us what the understanding of the people were and whether it had changed, and then that gives us the context for what Jesus is talking about. Ezra 10:22 and 3. And you see the passage up there, and it basically has a list of names. Spoke up and said, Ezra, we have transgressed against the Lord. Why? Because we have taken pagan wives from the people of the land. Now there is no hope in Israel. There is hope in Israel in spite of this. Now, therefore, we make a covenant with our God to put away, and that's the word shalach. That certificate of divorcement is the word shalach. Okay? And it actually is the idea of sending away. And so what you have here is they gave them a bill of divorcement. They sent them away. Let it be done according to the law. What law? The law in Deuteronomy 24. So the exception clause goes back to Deuteronomy 24, which is understood a certain way by Ezra and Nehemiah under the direction of God himself. I don't think this refers to just infidelity. By the way, the punishment for adultery was not divorce, it was being killed. How many divorced people how many fornicators, how many adulterers were around? Well, if Israel was following the law, none of them. They were dead. Okay? God had a very high standard, and so God essentially says, if these people go ahead and commit adultery, both the man and woman are brought, and they're both stoned to death, and no more adulteries around. No more problem. The punishment for adultery was stoning. You were dead. You didn't need a divorce clause for people who committed adultery, because once you're dead, it's not a real issue anymore. You know, dead people don't really have to worry about it. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and just keep going on. I am concerned, okay, lovingly, If you've been through a divorce situation, you've been through a really bad time. But too many churches really use this as an escape hatch. And I don't think that Jesus would sanction serial monogamy in the name of the faith. And it generally creates problems. Now, infidelity is absolutely horrible, and it needs to be dealt with. The church needs to intervene. There needs to be counseling. There needs to be every attempt to restore the relationship. Okay? This is the one time I wish my wife was around. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and just do that. I'm sorry about that. Folks, I'm going to say it. I don't think that the church is doing its job. I don't think it's doing its job here. And I know that this is hard, and I'm not blaming the victim. I'm actually holding the church to accountability. Okay? Jesus' likely connection between forgiveness and his teaching on divorce, I think, are connected. And I think the church has failed to really step in there and do its job. And I think our society doesn't have a real problem with divorce. So I wouldn't turn to worldlings to get their advice. All too often I hear about Christians who have their unsaved girlfriends hang around them and, give them really bad advice, or guys, where they just say, if I was you, I'd hang it up. I think that's really a bad place to get divorced. Okay? So I would say the goal of God is redemptive and creational. And so you want to go with that as the ethic that you work from. You can research it, but the reality is, when I look at these passages and I go back to the Deuteronomic passage and I go back to Ezra and I start asking the questions, I don't come up with a real easy standard as far as this. I would not accept it in most cases as being what God wants. So I'm not trying to hurt anybody. What I'm trying to say is I think the church has gotten used to something. And so, I think that's where it is. In fact, I think the disciples get the point. They're horrified. The disciples said to him, if this is the case of a man with a woman, we might as well not marry. I mean, if marriage is this permanent and we might get, stuck, then it's better that we just don't marry at all. I don't want to take these types of risks. If you could divorce for any reason, there'd be no reason for this reaction on the part of the disciples. I mean, they just say, hey, I can always move on. I think Jesus' standard is so intense for them. Wow, the ramifications hit them right in the face. It would be better to be single if marriage is that permanent. Okay? Now, I'm going to tell an example, and the names are saved to protect the guilty, and it is in reference to nobody that is watching this. Okay? But I know a girl who was dating an unbeliever. Now, he claimed to be a believer, but he came to believe her after their third date sort of thing, Like, hi, we've been to the movies. Okay, I've been to your church a few times. I now profess Jesus. Now, I think he could talk real well, but we were concerned that the number of months between his so-called profession of faith and how quickly the relationship moved struck us as a little funny. I mean, this is terribly convenient. And we weren't sure that he even knew what he believed. Now, the church pastors talked with the young man, but I think, those who were on the outside watching this were a little bit concerned. And she received advice to slow it down, take it easy. We don't know what's going on here. You might want to think this through. Okay? And she ignored the advice. In fact, her mother said, "Stop being negative." And so she got divorced. Go figure. I mean, the guy ended up being unfaithful, but I think he was, I don't think spiritually he was ever there. Okay. I think he was an unbeliever. He's not practicing the faith now at all. I think he found a good thing. He liked her. This is like the price of admission. And he has nothing to do with his children anymore. And now she's back in a church and remarried, and this was not a good step for her. And people tried to say something, and mommy ran interference, and this was a case in which some real thinking should have gone on. And I'm sorry, it's not good. It didn't leave a good testimony. Look at what Jesus says. What's a eunuch? For there are eunuchs who are born thus from their mother's womb. Okay? There are eunuchs who are made eunuchs by men. Now, we're an adult company here, and I've marked this not for children as usual. Eunuch is somebody who cannot procreate anymore. We'll use the term they've been neutered. I don't know a nicer way to put it, okay? There are those who are incapable of relationship from their mother's womb. There are those who are made incapable, those who like guarded the harem. The king didn't want the harem and the harem male guards to get too chummy, so they would take care of that problem. It's not nice, but it's the way it was. There are those who have made themselves eunuchs for the kingdom. Okay? Now, the idea here is there are those who have decided, for the sake of the kingdom, not to remarry in order to honor a certain standard. Okay? And I don't know, did we lose the transmission? I hope not. Okay? Because all of a sudden, everything went glitchified. But it looks like we're okay here. I'm going to continue on. It was just weird that the transmission like stopped. This is really difficult. Jesus says, look, this is so hard that only those God enables to accept it can accept it. I mean, this is like really intense. And Jesus' teaching here is there are some that need to forego marriage because of the ethical demands of the kingdom or even the ministry. And the church needs to encourage those who are called to singleness and encourage. Now, let me phrase this lovingly. The church needs not to encourage remarriage. I have seen that being like the next step. Hi, you're divorced. We are now fixing you up with people. Okay? That is not a good stance for the church to take. I know of one group that called their thing a single again ministry. I'm going to say that's not good language. Okay? You didn't become single again in the sense of you were never married. You became divorced. This is a painful healing sort of situation in which the church needs to heal. I don't know language that makes people happy about this, but I would look at it as a healing group, a divorce recovery group or divorce healing group. There's healing that needs to go on here. And so as far as the word of grace, if you've ended up in this position, you need help. You need brothers and sisters. You need to start putting your life back together because this was traumatic. Uh, you know, this was a ripping of two souls that God had had plans for, and it's really sad. If you have remarried, God's going to graciously meet you where you're at. If you haven't remarried, I'm not going to encourage you to do that. It's not because I don't love you and I don't want you to be happy. It's because I want you to be holy. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm going to tell you that I don't favor remarriage. Uh, there's a lot of healing. It tends to play into some things in our society. I think God would rather have reconciliation. Okay? And so I'm not going to be the one to encourage you to remarry. Okay? I am going to say if you're remarried, I'm not the one who's going to rain on your parade. Okay? But I have to tell you, I've heard homosexuals say to me, why shouldn't I be a homosexual? Heterosexual marriage doesn't work. I'm looking at all the divorces around me, and it doesn't seem that your model's much better than mine. Muslims have said this. Christians believe in multiple wives. They just believe in having them one spouse at a time. Now, I'm not trying to lay that on you, but I'm saying messages are being sent to our society. And I think good, healthy marriages send the sort of messages we want. If you're not in that situation, you can't change what's happened. Okay? But I don't encourage people to take that route. It's easier. I understand. Once you've tasted marriage, you never ever want to be alone again. I understand that. And the church is not probably much help to you. So that's my thing. Yes, I have a strong stand. Yes, I don't encourage remarriage. It's not my favorite thing. I do know that people are hurting, and if someone's in a remarriage, I tell them that, okay, go forward from there. God's grace will meet you. Okay, so there are dear moderators here. Please, stay a moderator. Just understand that, yes, my convictions tend to run the other way. Not because I want to be hurtful, but because I want to deal with the text the way it is. Understand that in any case, Jesus has a high regard and it's a high standard. I have a loving, very patient wife who probably could have strangled me. She has a saying. Her little saying is homicide, homicide yes, divorce no. And so I kind of appreciate that because that has some serious ramifications, ministry-wise and otherwise. That's why I'm not going to act as anyone's pastor. I'm not your pastor. I don't claim to be your pastor. But I do claim to try and teach what I see there. And so that's why I've taken you through this the way it is. I think the exception clause is probably in relation to unbelievers. I actually think it probably has more to do with unbelievers than it has to do with adultery. Strangely enough, and I'd be one of the few, but it's that unclean word or thing that really grabs me as a line and as following doing textual study. So, okay. My hope is that I, have presented the word well, that I've been honest with the text, that I haven't not said something simply because it's easier for me, but that I've not come down incredibly hard. So it's a little different if you're asking me than asking your pastor. But yeah, my stand is pretty strong on divorce and remarriage, but it's not strong against anyone. It's just strong in taking the text, just kind of very, very much a certain way. Before we close tonight, I do want to take the time to pray. Someone has been incredibly honest online with their situation. I'm just going to pray for continued healing and support. If that's offensive in any way, anyone can let me know that. Because I feel that someone's been very open and honest, and I appreciate that. And I want to acknowledge their going forward, their pain in going through the situation, And I really appreciate everybody who is supportive of this channel. I know we'll get our detractors eventually. We'll get people who disagree. I welcome them into the community. But those of you who have stuck with me and have been through this, I want to go ahead and support. So I think that's where I'm going to go from here in just a second. Yes, there is no condemnation. We just still we want to do the right thing. We always want to do the right thing. And we want to do what God wants us to do, and we want to be good witnesses in society. And we want to do what Jesus wants us to do. But yes, I think it's very important we understand that our foibles are covered by the atonement of Jesus. This is the beautiful thing about grace. Calvary covers it all. And so, definitely, if the enemy tells you anything else, quote the verse and rest in God. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and pray. And I thank you. This is a hard topic. But Jesus mentioned it, and he taught his disciples on it, and I didn't feel I could get away with doing the easy thing. And that's the hard part with apologetics and biblical theology and exegesis, is that, it'd be a lot easier just to avoid the ugly topics of life. But God wants to deal with every aspect of our lives. He really wants to do life with us. And so that's where things are at. So, again, excellent stuff from Romans, from our dear brother, Paul, who was an apostle who wrote Scripture and revealed to us God's will, particularly for the Messianic community. And keep sharing those verses. I'm going to take a moment or two to pray again. Be looking online for information. The next couple weeks are going to be exciting, bumpy, unusual as I drive the 5 hours and do podcasts and radio. And then I come home to do my orals and complete a dissertation. So for those who tune in later, hang with us. Our numbers are not phenomenal, but I continue to trust God that things will grow. And that we will make things better, and we will make it more comfortable for people to join us more often. So we're learning how to do this. And I can continue to follow this idea of leveraging biblical theology and applying the best of systematic to biblical and moving from biblical to systematic. Maybe it's the unusual thing that I can do for those that God will bring. So that's exciting. Okay. Having said that, I am going to move to the credits. Thank everybody. If your name's not on there, it's not because I don't care. It's just let me know. If I'm forgetting somebody, let me know. It's not a desire to. And I'm going to roll those, and then I'm going to pray. I'm going to turn the music down here so that we can actually take a minute or two and pray, because I really appreciate this. So I'm going to turn that down and pray. I hope you don't mind me closing my eyes. I got used to that. I didn't as a Jewish person, but then I became a believer, and Christians always close their eyes. And so then I discovered I couldn't do the Jewish prayer book with my eyes closed, and thought about whether I should learn Braille. Okay. Lord, thank you for this dear sister. She means a lot to the community. She is incredible at getting stuff up. She is an incredible encouragement to a lot of teachers and apologists online. Very active where she lives, sharing about her love for where she lives, and most of all, her love for you. And I pray that you'd give her wisdom. that she just work through these things. I pray that you give her sound counsel. And I can't ask for anything more than that. She belongs to you, not to me. Lord, you know, through Messiah, she has become yours. She is your daughter. She is yours to lead. Um, and so I pray that you would do just that. Where there is healing, let healing occur. Where there has been healing, let that continue. And I just pray that you would take care of her. Be with everyone else who is tuned in. Be with those who will watch this. This isn't, the best appraisal. I could have come out hard and just made dogmatic statements, but I'd rather just lay out what's going on in the text and let you do the real work. And so may you bless everybody. Thank you for the honesty that has been brought here. People kind of bearing their souls. Maybe Facebook, YouTube hates it. Maybe there'll be a lot of people that will shy away from this video because there's been honest conversation about an honest topic. And that will bother some people, but it's a good conversation to have. And it is good to look at the Word. So thank you so much for everyone that tuned in, people whose names are scrolling right now, those whose names haven't even appeared, some who support us through Chosen People, some who support us through Patreon, which has allowed us to start improving this station, and we hope to continue to improve it to your glory. Be with this dear sister, be with everyone else. Have your presence known to them and give them rest this evening or afternoon if they're real close to that international date line. And I ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. And there's a little bit more commentary here. I am rolling the credits here, but I can go ahead and roll those and continue to talk to you and hope that you hear me. I do not even know right now if you have sound. And you do. And so I am glad for your son. Blessings on your son. And Elizabeth says she has a daughter who will be turning 30 next month. Blessings on your family. And I pray that they stay close to you and you can stay close to them. I know my kids live further away. So, Jack Ray, thanks for tuning in. I don't think there'll be a lot of questions. There was a lot of good scripture shared. Air Church, glad you love the intro. Glad you were here. The family is back. And it is 7:04 Arizona time. I don't want to even think about what time it is for some of you folks on the East Coast right now, because it's 3 hours difference. So, and it will be 4 hours difference eventually, because we do not do daylight savings time. So I'm going to say my blessings, and I'm going to get ready to sign off. Again, thank you all. Whoops. As I get ready to click off, I'm sorry about that. A lot of believers' faiths get wrecked in the universities. And if you would like to suggest any topics to me, I would welcome that, because good apologetics is something that young people need before they go to secular universities. They need to understand their worldview and why, and I think that would help them with some of those professors that live to torpedo Christians. So that's just a side note. So I have said my good nights, and I will see you. It'll probably be just a premiere next week, and I'm working on Thursday. And we will go from there. I'm not quite sure how much prep I'll be able to do and what. So hang in there. bumpy ride, but if all this works right, you will have Dr. Jeff